rendition in there, just a little. But anyway, we are continuing our series on Ecclesiastes. Zach, could you grab me a water? I don't know if there's any out back or. And we are in chapter 10, and we only have a few more weeks of this. So I remember one time I was sitting where you are in the church, and we had gone through the book of Acts chapter by chapter like this, and there's like 29 chapters, and it took like forever. There was a few breaks in there for holidays, and so we had been in this chapter for like, and they said that like, oh, we're almost, and I was like, woo, in the back, and they got like someone was like, I just so I am in that spot where I'm like, man, I wish we could get on to something else. But there's something about the discipline of just walking through a book of the Bible every once in a while that is good for us. This is another one of those chapters. It's not really maybe heavy hitting, but there's just enough weirdness in it that I'm like, if I could not do this, that would be fun. But this is where we are at. But kind of a breakdown again of the idea of what Ecclesiastes is, because that can help us kind of sift some of these things in that. Thank you. Kind of getting over that cold that's been going around. It like went away, and then like Friday night, it just was like, hey, by the way, you can't talk anymore. Thanks. The book of Ecclesiastes is in the section of Scripture. Now, this isn't like when they wrote these, they're like, oh, this is going to fit in this neat little spot in this volume of books. So they just wrote these, and kind of the Spirit kind of moved through them, and people recognize that there's something to them that's a little bit more than some other writings. And so we categorize them in this area of the wisdom literature. So that right away kind of gives us an idea that what's going on here, it's not necessarily narrative. It's not telling us that this happened type story. It is not, it's not really even in the main theme of Christ's coming, because much of the Old Testament is setting up the Messiah as it's coming through, and prophecies and just different leanings and different things happening. It doesn't have that type of a quality. But it tells us about the nature of God and the nature of humanity in a way that steps outside of that narrative type thing. It steps into this place of wisdom. Wisdom is not just knowledge. It is this infused place of, well, how do we apply that knowledge? How does that fit, right? And if you navigate the world in a very black and white type of a way, which sometimes religion and especially in Christianity itself will sometimes lead us into, that there's just, this is how things go. I mean, many of you who have children, that eventually they start out these cute little babies, and they grow and grow and grow. Right? And they start to have their own ideas, right? And black and white thinking all of a sudden hits another person's black and white and gray thinking. And the next thing you know, this is like things are going sideways. Or if you've ever just talked to another human and you say, I said this, and this is what they came out with. Right? You ever had that conversation? Right? I mean, I if you ever watch, or read, I don't post half as much on social media as I like to just read things, because it's just like a novel. It's like writes out, and someone will post something, and then there's all this stuff, and I'm like, how did they get that from that? And this, like, there's something going on here that I am not sure what's going on. And so things are not black and white. Things are not whatever you put in, you get out all the time. But at the same time, there are good choices that we can make that hedge our bets, if you will. Right? There's things that we can do that does make life go better for us. And the book of Ecclesiastes is wrestling with that. Hey, do the best you can, but know that it's not always going to work out. Rely on God to do what God does, but then look for where you need to do what you need to do. And not lose faith in that. The book of Ecclesiastes wrestles with those things. And I just think in our day and age, like, we need this type of wisdom baked into who we are, right? Because we are just constantly looking for the next celebrity pastor or musician or whatnot to just tell us what to think. And maybe what they're thinking is good and it works for them, but I just know it's not going to fit for every cookie cutter life. And we may not want to follow everything that's out there. In chapter 10, we're going to read through this, but the main idea of chapter 10, and it has all this kind of ancient poetry and ancient agricultural nods that we were going to miss, but hopefully we'll catch a few of them and lay them out a little bit. And there's even some, we get to the end, there's a really wild one. But the idea of this chapter, I want to kind of lay it out a little bit, so as we read it, maybe you'll catch it as we go through and break it down, is this idea of being foolish, and how foolishness, or folly as it's going to use through, really undermines the pursuit of the good life, right? Because for many of us, maybe we have received Christianity or the scriptures through this idea of you need to get this prayer right. Right? Anybody seen The Labyrinth? Right? Yeah, the 80s kids, right? The Labyrinth. And there's a scene in there. For those of you who haven't seen it, you're missing something pretty amazing, but you might be better off not watching it. David Bowie and the leotard is burned in my mind forever. All I can smell is Aquanet when I watch that. The hairspray. Yeah. Mother burning the child walking into the bathroom. Anyway, it's going to be one of those days. Okay. In the movie, there's this scene where the plot of the movie is that there's this young teenage girl who is very emotionally upset because she has to watch her brother, and it's the end of the world because she has to babysit so her parents can go out to something, and she's throwing a 15-year-old girl, tantrum. And 15-year-old boys do it too, so it's not a sexist thing, it's more of a 15-year-old thing. And she's really into this fantasy world with this goblin. She reads in this book, and there's this goblin king who is in love with this girl, and he'll do whatever she says, right? So that's in her mind. It's this fantasy play that she likes to read, and she's in there with her brother who's crying. He's kind of a hefty toddler infant, and that she doesn't know though is that story is true. And there's a goblin king who is madly in love with her, and in the closet is a bunch of these, Hanson puppets, like hiding in the closet. And they're listening, going, did she say the words? Right? And she's saying all these, kind of reciting the poems of the book that she has, and did she say it? Did she say it? Did she say it? And then she eventually says, I wish the Goblin King would come and take you away. And that's like the magic words, and they take the baby away and sends her up this adventure where she finds herself, and all this different stuff happens. But many of us connect our salvation to that, as if there's angels and Jesus and everyone's hiding up in heaven or in the corners going, did they say it? Did they say it? Did they say the prayer? Did they get the words just right? They said kind of close, but not, right? And they're in this place. But I tell you, it is more about seeing the way of Jesus and putting our hope in the person of Jesus, right? We're saying, I recognize that left to myself, along with all of humanity, there's a brokenness. There's something off in me. Even when I try, it doesn't work out. And in my own, I'm just fighting my own stuff all the time. And the Bible would call that sin, right? You've missed the mark. God had this perfect mark for you, and we all miss it. None of us are perfect in that way. And our imperfectness on different values of levels, sure, actually erodes the world. Right? You add a little bit of brokenness, a little bit of brokenness, a little bit of brokenness, a little bit of, and some people out there add a lot more, right? But when we come into a place where we understand that we cannot make the world a better place without Jesus, we cannot come even near to God without something helping us get in that space, we recognize that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection make a way for us to come before God. There was a penalty, there was a debt that we needed to pay, which was death, separation from God. And Jesus paid that debt for us on the cross. And then when he resurrects from the grave, he destroys the power of sin. And for those who say, I am putting my trust in that, right? And And however that comes out of your mouth, that's one way, but then your life follows behind it. Right? That's kind of what Paul was talking about. He'd gone through the motions, but there was this thing of baptism just saying like, this is foolish. Why would I want to do this? But then you read the book and it's like, hey, do this. Kind of like doing my own thing. And it's a mark of obedience and moving that. And in following Jesus, it changes and transforms the way we see ourselves, because now, some people have a hard time with that they're not contributing to the brokenness of the world and that they're perfect. There's a few folks that fall in that category. I think most Mainers get it, right? It's too cold up here to pretend that we have it all together, right? But we come into this place where now we see ourselves reconciled with God. We see ourselves as not everything that comes out of me is helpful. I need to watch that. I need to look into that. I need to submit that to God. And in that process, we actually start to, I believe, find what the good life is. Right? Every philosophy, every religion, every setup of world, every guru on YouTube that tells you to jump in cold water or eat this or eat that or do whatever, what they're saying to you is, I have found the good life. Follow this and you will lead the good life. Right? And I think that the scriptures are pulling us into that. And it doesn't mean that everything will go well for you, but it's saying this is your best attempt at being fully human, being fully alive, being fully cooperative with the things of God and transforming this world. And to be foolish is to step outside of that. To be foolish is to step outside of those things. And we're going to look at how the author of Ecclesiastes kind of lays out some of these ideas of foolishness. Because one, we're going to find they're not all that spiritual. They're connected to very earthly things, which is kind of the theme of Ecclesiastes, under the sun. So let's start. Chapter 10, verse 1. As dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. Stop right there. This one, because this kind of like is probably one of the clearer statements we have in this. So if you have some perfume, right? Good perfume today is expensive, but in this time it was very expensive, right? And a couple flies die in there, change the chemistry of the perfume, and now it smells bad. This little fly outweighs wisdom and honor. Many of us know someone, or even our own story has been derailed for seasons, where we have lived fairly honest lives, and then we do this one thing. That one day, that one moment, that one word spoken, that little bit of folly, that little bit of foolishness contaminates the whole lot. And it takes time and energy to overwork that. I think one of the, we talked a little bit a few weeks ago about the idea of speaking against authority and where that line is, and especially in the church. But I would say one of the kind of great words of wisdom that I had was, years ago someone gave to me, was when you're in places and you're making choices and you feel your heart starting to pull in different directions, know that there are decisions and things that you can do that will have great consequences. That will take decades of good work and taint that. Just all it takes is one moment, right? One thing to pull you out of that way. And the list is pretty endless in those things. And so guard your heart from that. Many times we can trick ourselves into thinking, well, I'm a pretty good person, right? And then we do things that step outside of that and compromise us in those ways. And sometimes we get away with it. Sometimes it doesn't add much, but there are moments when... My Bible app does the same thing. It will start reading. I've been in public places and it's like, and I have like a South African guy on mine because I think it sounds more spiritual. So it's very like, Ugandan or something like that. It's just very like deep. Feel muscular. Let's continue. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. We're going to leave that one alone. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense and show everyone how stupid they are. If a ruler If a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offense to rest. I don't know what to tell the story. There's been many times in conflict and where people are very amped up, and if you just stay calm in those moments, one, it usually ticks them off. Right? You have someone who's trying to get you they're trying to goat you, and you just. I remember one time I'll tell a story. I'll keep out some of the censored parts, but we had a time where I was hanging out with a lot of teenagers in our community, and there was a group that we were trying to form, and we'd go down to the local ball field and play wiffle ball for a while. It was one of the small fields, and we drove in, and this may offend some of us, but it's fine. There was three or four vehicles that drove in. I was actually the lead vehicle, so we were all going in a line together. That'll be important a little later. And while we're over there, a police officer came. Right now, personally, I respect police. I think they do a job that none of us want to do. So maybe we should think about that when we start to critique things. But he came over, and there was one person that he called over and started to berate them about how fast they were driving. I remember we were all in line. This happened to be the only two black kids that were in our group, and he was just like laying into them, and I was like, this is something weird is going on here. So I went over to him, and he was swearing, and he kept using the shortened abbreviation for fornication, right? And I said, sir, can you just stop? I want you to know there's no fornication going on out here in the baseball field. And he stops. He's like, what do you mean, sir? I'm just trying to tell you, there's no fornication happening here. Because you keep saying that we're around, right? Driving too fast, and there's just no fornication. And it just caught him off guard. He was like, and then I told him what was happening. I'm like, look, I was leading, I drove, we weren't driving fast. These are, yes. And then one of the kids there did have trouble with the law. And I'm like, look, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm hanging out with these kids. Can you just I don't know what you're trying to accomplish here. And he just kind of, okay, well, just keep it down. And he left, right? And my demeanor and just diffused the whole situation. Now, he probably has more information on some of those kids than I did, and so maybe he should have been a little rough with them. But, it was just coming into that space, just it lowers it down, and it can be extremely confident, powerful, and strong, right? All right, so before we say any other bad words. All right. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, in verse 5. The sort of error that arises from a ruler. Fools who are put in mighty high positions. I feel like that should be like the little ticker tack at the bottom of every news station. While the rich occupy low ones. I have seen slaves on horseback, while princes go on foot like slaves. Right? So again, he's saying there's this upside downness to this nature. Right? Just because someone's a ruler doesn't mean that they know what's going on. They might be in foolishness and on and back and forth. There's no marker that we can say defines all these things for us. Verse 8 says, whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them if the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened. More strength is needed, but skill will bring success. I should mark that one somewhere for me. Sharpening things. What's interesting here is we have a few agricultural type things that we might miss as we read through this. We talked about digging a pit. In this time, most digging of a pit would mean they're digging this to actually catch animals, right? Whether it's animals they want to eat or animals that they're trying to defend themselves from. They dig these pits and they would cover it over, right? They'd cover that pit over so that the animal would fall in. Imagine falling into your own pit. How foolish that would feel. Working through a stone wall without care and having a poisonous snake bite you, hurting yourself as you're working with an axe. It gives this imagery of sometimes we do things And the thing that we're doing that we think is going to be helpful is actually going to hurt us. Right? And there's a foolishness in that. Again, he goes into this, verse 11. If a snake bites before it is charmed, the charmer receives no fee. I don't know. I guess if you're a bad charmer, that's what Justin told me, and I'm like, I have no idea. No grid for snake charmers. I've tried to find some information on it, and there's not a lot out there. So if you're a bad snake charmer and you get bit, I guess I'm not paying for it. Words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but fools are consumed by their own lips. At the beginning, their words are folly, and the end, they are wicked madness, and fools multiply words. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them? The toil of fools wearies them. They do not know the way to town. Woe to the land whose king has a servant and whose prince feasts in the morning. We're going to read this next part separate, but I just want to stop right here. So he's going all through these things that are really more connected to their time and their culture, right? We could probably come up with some of our own that fit more into our moment. But I just want to leave you with this little construct that I use for myself and when working with others is when we have an issue, maybe you have conflict with someone, you have something that's not working, a relationship, a task, something is just not working out, it keeps running into something. The way to kind of find what's going on is you kind of look for two things, and these are maybe a little rough. Maybe some of you, but I think we'll get over it. We've been reading Ecclesiastes for the last month. We can talk about this. Is usually the issue is there's some kind of competence issue, meaning whatever's being done is not being done well enough, or there's a character issue, right? And it can be hard to distinguish which two are which. If you're like me, we usually go right straight to the character issue, right? Well, they did this because they're trying to get me. They're trying to get something out of this, or they're lying about, right? Usually it's a competency issue, which people don't like to hear, right? But maybe they didn't realize that they were showing up that way. They didn't realize that was happening. But say this, let's have a little situation. Say you're selling widgets, because that's what you sell in these hypothetical situations, and you have a package for 100 widgets that need to be sold. You package up the 100 widgets, you mail them out, the receiver gets them, and there's 99, right? There's a number of stories that could be made from this. One could be, I thought I put 100 in there, and I only put 99. My bad. Incompetence, right? I just didn't do it as well as I should have. The other story could be, we only had 99 made, I didn't want to slow down the order, so I just sent 99 just to see if I get it through. Or I sent 99 because, you make a little more profit when you sell more than you made, right? So that would be, those two things would now fall into character issues, right? And if you're in part of teams, if you have staff, if you have employees, if you have people around you, you just kind of work through this scale of like, where's the issue? Is it someone needs a little more training? Is it someone needs a little more clarification? Is it someone needs to be put in a different position because they're just not adept to that? Or is there a character issue? Now, character issues are harder to solve. You have to figure out why they're hiding those things, why they're manipulating or lying in those ways, and those can be very hard to go. But the best way to do this, if you're in those systems where you have people around you like that, is to still apply it to yourself. The parts that you have in whatever system, right, you just say, hey, I didn't communicate that clearly enough. That was my bad, incompetence, right? Hey, the other day when I said that, I really didn't, I felt ashamed, and I kind of lied about that, right, character. And you just lay those things out there, and as you start to walk in that way, you'll, I think, have authority to speak into other people's lives in that way. And this idea of foolishness is ignoring our incompetency, digging pits that we fall into. I've watched people cut wood, and it's scary sometimes. I'm like, you do know that you have feet, and we'd like to not cut your feet off. Like, can we just reposition a few things here, right? I have seen people, this is a great imagery, I think, for foolishness. It happens. I watched a guy cut up in a tree, and he's cutting the tree branch that he's sitting on, but he should have been turned around 180 degrees, because when he cut through, the tree branch that he was on falls to the ground, right? It was a competency mistake, but it was quite foolish, and he got banged up, and we were out about, and it wasn't a place you really wanted to get banged up like that, right? It was a foolish mistake. So as we look at this list of different things, we can think of our own stuff, and we just need to own our own stuff. That's what it really comes down to. You don't want to be foolish. Just own your own stuff. You have something in your life that's just really not working. Whether it's a relationship, whether it's finances, whatever it may be. Look at the things and go, am I competent enough? There's areas where I'm just not lined up. Or is there character issues on me or involved with things? Now, I don't think this scale works for everything. Moody teenagers probably doesn't work anymore. If you're married, I think wives can use it, but I don't think husbands can. I think that's how the rule goes. And, right? But if we don't want to be foolish, we have to just be really honest with ourselves. And that's really hard to do. There needs to be a level of awareness that we need. The other thing that I pull from this is we look at this list, they are all very much wrapped up in this idea of competency, of being skilled at something. And one of the things that I see in our culture that I'm kind of concerned about is there's a less and less emphasis put on just being good at something, right? Like, if you ask somebody like, hey, my name's so-and-so, who are you? They're going to say their name and probably what they do. Right? That's actually starting to shift away. There's maybe some healthiness to that, like you are more than whatever it is you do. But I would really encourage you, whatever it is you do it with excellence. Right? Do it with excellence. Do it, the scriptures tell us to say, do it as you're doing it unto the Lord. Whatever that might be. You're pressing keyboard things, you're cutting hair, you're working on buildings, And it doesn't mean you have to be boastful and bragful about it, but be competent, right? When I was in high school, they'd make us do they'd take these tests, or you had to pretend that you were going to do some career or whatever. And I always picked dentist because eventually what I told them was the reason why I did it is because I really wanted to get a big giant drill, and right as the person's passing out, I wanted to pull the big drill out. And they're like, oh. My guidance counselor was worried about me. I had no desire to be a dentist. Right? But we do have in our culture also, on the same end of if we don't want to do that, we also have we are becoming more and more suspicious of people who are authorities in things. Right? I love it when I go to my doctor and I tell them, I Googled it. Right? And they just kind of go, yeah, let me look at it. Right? Now, 99% of the time, we're on the same page, right? But I believe this person that I'm going to hopefully has, in different points, has put a little more time and energy than a 10-minute Google search into their craft, right? I fix things around my house by watching YouTube the hour before, right? When I hire someone, I hope that they've done a little more research than that. I have seen, I go into a lot of salons, maybe some of you have seen this before, but I've seen people's heads almost catch on fire, right? Because people are putting chemicals in there. Oh, I didn't put anything in before, I promise. And they're really and there's just smoke filling in space. People's hair is melting off. And I'm like, I think I gotta go. There's just chaos going on, and you're like, that's not normal. I've worked in some really harsh chemicals in salons. There's some stuff in there that could kill you. Seriously. You gotta know what you're doing. So be competent, have good character, and be open to that. At times you're foolish and you need to correct yourself. You'll only be able to speak into other people's lives to the degree that you open yourself up to that process. Verse 17, this is where it gets a little weird. Blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth and whose princes eat at proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. So if you have leaders, kings in this case, who are not drunk all the time, that is helpful. Though laziness and rafters sag because of idle hands, the house leaks. We had a roof leak a while back, and I read this, and I should probably go fix that. A feast is made for laughter, wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. right? So this is maybe a little counterintuitive. The book has told us over and over that maybe this is not the case. I would say this about this. There's a number of different things that people have pulled up on this. One, money is not in itself bad at all. And I am actually convinced, doing the things that I've done for a while, that money in the hand of a righteous, confident person who has their life pointing in the right way, especially lived with God, is probably right up there with one of the biggest resources that's needed to shape the world. Right? Sometimes we like to think, money, we don't need that. No. Money is needed to make things happen. When it's in the hands of the righteous, things go well. When it's not, things don't go well. Do not revile the king, even in your thoughts, or curse the rich in your bedroom, because a bird in the sky may carry your words, and a bird on the wing may report what you say. So the first time I read this, and I was like, what is going on? This is like the weirdest line that I've read in like my whole life. Like, this is getting weird. Now, there's a number of thoughts here, right? I have read and listened to some people wrestle with this, that I go, this person's loony. They need to probably get checked in somewhere. Talking about the vibrations and everything's connected. And I go, I don't think that's the thought that was going on in ancient, wherever time this is written. But there is a number of things. One, we have the expression even today that we would say, a little bird told me, or a little birdie told me, right? And what that means is that information about a situation has gotten to me, and I am not going to open up my sources, right? And it's usually said in information that is like, it could be something good, like someone's expecting, or someone got engaged, or something like that. But it usually is used in a space of like, we need to talk. Because a little birdie told me about XYZ, right? And I wonder, we still have that same antidote. I wonder if that's kind of where they're coming from here. There is in some of the mythology of the time where birds could, maybe you're hearing in this way, very Narnia-ish. You're listening to Narnia, the trees are listening, the birds are working for the queen, these different ways. And there's also this other idea of, I don't know, the other day when it was really warm, the birds were singing. And there's always this idea of like, there's always birds around, right? Now we live more indoors than past lives have, we live more indoors, but there's always birds around. And it's not maybe convinced that birds are listening to you and sharing its story, but it's this idea of like, don't even let negative, antagonistic thoughts be in you as a person and out, because it's, the world outside of you is listening. Right? If you have small children, right? The first time they say a bad word, and it's like, well, where did that come from? Oh, come on, right? Right? Where did they get that? It must have been at grandma's, right? No. There's always someone listening. And the best way to not get things that we don't want out is to work on not having them, right? If we have anger against someone, can we process that enough in ourselves that we can say, look, that was wrong, that was my fault, your fault, whatever, and we move on. We're not harboring and fostering up that thing. Because if you harbor and foster it long enough, it'll get out, and somebody will say, hey, a little birdie told me. It got back to me. It hurt me. Right? This would be, I would follow this in the character side of the competency character graph. We have these thoughts against people, and they'll get out. They'll get out. And usually, the little birdie that carries them adds flavor to the story. Have you ever had those? I've heard a lot of things about myself that I did or didn't do, and get back to me and go, wow, half of that was true. That would be a good story, right? So I don't think the writer here is whispering to birds. The other ideas is there are pigeons that send messages, and in that way, and there's some other translations are not sure if this is necessarily birds, or it could be even angels or demonic type stuff going on. But I think the main line of this is, look, keep your heart pure. Don't let things fester up in you, because eventually it will get out, and it will cause issues. So as we read through this, there's agricultural things going on, there's things about kings and birds talking and all these different things going on that might feel very distant from us. The idea of living a life that is upright, living a life that is to the best of our ability low on the foolish end of the scale. And we're going to read in chapter 12, at the end of this in a couple weeks here, that the main goal of this writing is that we would align ourselves with the things of God, that we would follow after God. And there's so many things that when we step outside of the ways of God, they just become foolish. We look foolish, we act foolish, we do foolish things. And those only lead to more brokenness and more pain, more dysfunction. So we stand together. We're going to take communion. Elizabeth, if you want to come up and pray. As we take communion, why don't we practice an open communion. So if you want more of Jesus,